Workshop on change, how to live with and through it. I'm Linda Lee Ratto. I'm a master educator by trade and by education, and a leadership consultant and coach. In the last few years, I've specifically wanted to connect with folks through webinars because it is such a personal experience. So thank you for joining us. This means that you are probably going through some significant change in your life. And this workshop is based on many experts, and yet what I do in my lifetime and in my work is kind of choose a la carte the things that really work for me and my life of change. Change seems to be equal to life these days, especially the rapid growth of technology and our experiences with stress and strain on what is expected of us in all of our communities, at home, at work, and in our social gatherings. So this webinar is divided into 4 categories. First, the stages of grief. Then secondly, being exceptional about your life. Thirdly, becoming consciously evolving, if you will. And fourth, integrating your change and what you've learned back into your 3 communities. So on that note, I would like to share with you that there is a PowerPoint of slides that give you key resources that this webinar is based on. But this isn't really just a class, if you will. I'm hoping that you will take from this a practical application in your life on many levels, and that you are inspired to look at change as life and an opportunity to learn about yourself and to share that learning in your communities. So part 1 of this webinar is based on the stages of grief. And when you look at the stages of grief developed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, they were based on her experience with death and dying, a name of one of her first books, actually. So the stages of grief, if you are experiencing a trauma or a high change, and by that I mean many succeeding shifts in your life, and I'll get to what happened to me so that you might identify a bit with why I'm in the field. These are significant shifts in your life or absolute shocking changes. And shock is the first category of a human grief and what this involves in development as a human being. There are 5 categories that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross based her work on, the death process that moved into the hospice movement that is part of our culture now in most countries. Shock, anger, denial, or let's make a deal, sadness, acceptance, and I add the word hope. Not the word hope, but actually hope in general. So what I would like to do is ask you to consider, as I tell you about my experiences, is one or more significant changes that have happened to your life this year. Now we've started a new year, of course, but it could be in the last year of your life. What are you experiencing that feels massive for you? Certainly there are different categories of a large change. And in my lifetime, in a period of 6 years, I will give you just what happened to me, and perhaps you can identify with some of those examples as significantly identifying what has happened to you. Sometimes life is so fast and you have a pileup, if you will, that taking the time as we are with this webinar to reflect and then ID how you're doing first involves simply identifying the big things that have happened in your life. In a matter of 6 years early on in my marriage, we had 3 children, moved twice, and within that 5 event category in my life, our first child was born missing a hand, which moved my educational background into a field of study I had never learned before. So that was for sure a shock, and I stayed in shock for quite a while and actually realized that if I didn't move through my own grief process in the death of a certain vision that I had for our first child, then I would not be creating a wonderful developmental family life for my child. So identifying my stages of grief and working through them was a big part of our marriage. How my husband and I worked through learning about prosthetics, for example, and so on. So those 6 changes happened, and then after our third child, I had cancer diagnosis and chemo and reconstruction. Following that, and finally, in these 6 years, my youngest child, when he was 6, was blinded in one eye in an accident. So if you can just look at my life as an example of a landslide of change, what I would like to inspire you to do is to see that life is a learning process, period. I chose not to be a victim of what has happened to us as a family, but to see how I could nurture our children through and with what had happened in a way that created a happy home life, as well as joyful work in terms of what I had to share with others. As an educator, I do have this bent to share what I've learned